he was talking about data on a data basis level. He was talking about, based in data, I should say, things that they see as a bank through transactions that they watch, through relationships that they have, through approaches or conversations they have around business with cities, with governments, with businesses. It was great stuff. And as we think about planning the comprehensive plan here for our city, and we think about what works and what doesn't work, this was a great opportunity to hear some really, really good stuff. So that's why we're here today. I really appreciate this is sort of off schedule. It's not part of the comprehensive plan requirement. This is a freebie, so I really appreciate those of you who have taken the time out of your day to be here. We're going to try to record it. Well, I don't know where we stand on that. We're good? We're ready to roll? So he needs a mic. He needs
as long as we're close to that microphone.
Yeah.
From the podium, that'll be great.
All right. And that's the camera?
Yep. Single wide shot camera for slides and for.
Perfect. Shall I bless the foods and we'll get started? All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for the opportunity to discuss our city that we love. We pray that you'll bless this food and this fellowship. In your name we pray, amen. All right, Cal.
All right. Cool.
I think I've already given you the big send.
Thanks.
Yeah. By the way, that's the first time I've ever heard angels sing used in conjunction with anything I've ever done. All right. So who was at the Roswell Inc. event a while back? Okay, good. You all can go take a nap or something for the next hour. Actually, we do have some updated material in this one, so I think it'll be pretty interesting to most of you. Thanks for having me to Roswell. It's a great community. I love coming in here. It's just a great visual coming in through the city squares, and I've enjoyed my time here. I really didn't spend a bunch of time here until last year when I was invited to come up, and it's been great to discover the town. I'll tell you what. I do want to talk a little bit about where we are economically, what we're seeing in the bank, a few trends. I'm going to show you two proprietary methods that we have to show that. And I'll tell you, when I look at this year and I think about how it looks in an economic context, I can't recall a year where we've had more fundamental structural changes to track. Not 2008 with the GFC, not 2020 with COVID. Those were all much simpler to explain. I mean, you had a pandemic. You know, we had bad financial structure, whatever. This is much, much different. I mean, there's really a pattern of paradigm shifting systemic shocks that may or may not stick depending on which appeals court is going to hear it next. So unbelievable how it's operating. And I also can't recall an economy with more variation in sentiment. And that's really what I'm going to focus on. Is that what yours? The angels are singing. I can't recall an economy with more variation in sentiment, and that's something that we're really going to focus on today is what our commercial clients, which would be the kind of people that would come to Roswell, that would take the good jobs, that would build the good businesses, that would develop the real estate, just to show you what they're seeing out in the market. And there are two ways that we do that in our analytics group that I run, and analytics is sort of a fancy word. You hear it, you think about big data centers, you know, all kinds of computing power. We actually have a little bit broader definition. We do have the big data. That's the advanced data analytics piece over there where we look at our customers' transactions. We look at about 25 million transactions a month. But we also have old school qualitative methods. And it's sort of a revelation that you might actually go out there and ask your customers what they think about something or what they're doing to get their opinions. And that has really worked out well for us. And that's what we're going to start with, the survey. When I spoke at Roswell Inc. a little while ago, we talked about the previous quarter survey. This is almost brand new. And I'll tell you how it works. It is very close to a Purchase Managers Index survey, which if you're not familiar with that, those focus on business activity right now compared to the previous quarter, margin trends, so how much input costs relative to what you're able to sell them for, and employment levels compared to the previous quarter and then a year in the future. We also tacked on some bonus questions to this one that you wouldn't normally see in a PMI survey. And that is, we ask our customers what the impact of government policy has been on them since the election, also any impacts from trade policy. And we also are asking them about their usage and the effectiveness of AI. And we'll get into that in just a little bit because that dovetails into it. We hit about 400 customers this quarter, which is a little bit low. We normally get about 500 to 600, but that is a very, very wide representation of a whole lot of different industries. And when you think about the number of narrative questions that we're putting out there, it's a massive amount of data, which I'm going to try to distill to some takeaways for you. So timing-wise, this took place from September 16th to October 5th. So to kind of frame up what was going on then, you had a fear of the government shutdown, but it only shut down at the very end of this timeline. And we normally get responses that come in on the front end of this, so the shutdown would not have impacted this that much. So just keep that in mind. When we break down the size of the customer that responds to this survey, we've got about 75% small business. We've got about 20% commercial. That's more of a middle market, slightly larger company kind of thing. And then we've got 5% wholesale, which are our larger clients in the bank. And that basically follows the distribution of the number of customers that we have by unit count. You're obviously going to have a whole lot more small business than you're going to have large wholesale. So let's start with business activity on the current side. When you look at this chart, this is how we've done this survey. We basically ask them, how is your business activity relative to the previous quarter? They can respond lower, they can respond same, or they can respond higher. And if you look at the past 2 quarters, there's virtually no change in any of these answers at all. That is not surprising one bit, because if you think about it, we've basically been in a static position where everybody's been trying to figure out what's going on, and they're not really willing to make a move investment-wise or CapEx-wise. So they're sitting on the sidelines trying to figure it out. Now, this is current situation. Since I'm trying to look ahead in my group, I don't really care very much about what's happening right now. I care about what's coming. And that's where the story gets a little bit interesting. So when we ask our customers how they feel about business activity 1 year from now, what we've seen is a sustained response where our clients think that business is going to be better 1 year from now. And interestingly, it has stayed at almost the same number. It's weird. I thought this was almost a mathematic impossibility, and I got our Georgia Tech analysts, not our Georgia ones, and I am a Georgia graduate, to check the math on this, and it is correct. Yes. Hey, look, I teach there too, so I've got you on that one. The higher piece has stayed pretty constant. We do have a little impact on the same and not much movement on lower. But when I think about these responses, if we're going to ask our clients each quarter, how do you think about business a year from now? Think about how it may have looked in the fourth quarter. You had a lot of our small business population, they just come off an election that was favorable to the majority of them, and a lot of them were excited and fired up about it. So most of the thoughts about activity 1 year out would have been pretty good. Go into the second and third quarter and ask that question, and you've got the volatility in the market, you've got the lack of clarity, you've got people worried about how tariffs and policy are affecting them. Their outlook 1 year in the future may be a little bit lower. It may be higher than where they are, but it may be lower. So our hypothesis was that the bar was lowering. The response rate was staying about the same, but the bar was lowering, and we were seeing our customers become less optimistic overall. But we wanted to test that. We don't want to make an assumption. We asked them that question. We said, how does your expectation this quarter compare to what you had in December? And we were dead wrong. They are still optimistic. The viewpoint has not gone down very much at all. Now, the same number is fairly elevated at 40%, but the fact that 40% of them still have a higher expectation now than they did in the fourth quarter, it was surprising to me. Now, I still believe that if you go back to the second quarter, that bar lowered, and I was on the phone yesterday with the Fed's Regional Economic Information Network chief, and basically they're the group that goes out and talks to communities all over the Atlanta district, and they report to Dr. Bostic, and they say this is what's going on in our communities. They use our survey results as well, and I asked this question to him. I said, have you seen this optimism maintained? And he said that what he saw was a dip in the winter of this year, which is kind of what I saw, and sort of a static bit in the spring, but we've seen a little bit of pickup in optimism amongst small businesses lately because they've just sort of accepted the status quo and decided we're just going forward. And we feel pretty good about it, enough to where we're going to make a positive movement, because we don't really see this picture clarifying that much going forward. And we got to do something. We just can't sit on the sidelines and wait on all of this to resolve itself. And part of the factors that affect this client base would be the government policy piece. And that's our bonus question that I'm going to segue into now. When we ask our customers, does this impact you? And we basically had 4 levels of impact: no impact, moderate, substantial, and minor. We had 50% that said moderate to substantial. So that's the piece that I want to focus in on. And the chart that I'm showing right here is really interesting to me, because what we see is that the no impact number is shrinking. The minor impact number dropped a little bit in the third quarter, but the moderate impact number continues to go up. And what that's telling me is that there is a little more clarity in the market now. And these government actions, I mean, think about it. The executive orders are immediate unless the courts intervene. So we're not waiting on tariffs to hit and work through a supply chain. They're happening right now. DOGE started as soon as they got in the door. A lot of these policy actions are in place, and they're affecting people and businesses negatively and positively. And so you're seeing our clients become more cognizant of that fact, and you see it show up in the impact. Now, when you ask the clients, where are the impacts and are they positive or negative, you get a pretty interesting list. We'll start off with the cons. They're on the red side, and they're a little bit more negative responses than positive responses. And when I was talking to the Fed survey team about this, they said, and I agree with this, I put this out there as what I thought was happening, and they verified it. If you are in a position where you're being negatively impacted by something, in a survey, you're more likely to tell somebody about that than you are if things are wonderful. So we expect to see more cons than pros. So I try to keep this as apolitical as possible. You're going to see me toe the line on both sides here. But these are certainly impactful, and I give you some examples of exactly how this has happened. First concern would be subsidies and grant cuts. And these aren't just government direct grants or government contracts that may be off the table. I don't know if there was a memo that was distributed by the OMB which basically said if you are a program that does not align with the administration's priorities, expect to get trimmed or cut. That was published. So there are, you go look at specific programs that would fall into this categories, arts, certain philanthropies, those kinds of things are being affected by this. Departmental downsizing is another one. And what's interesting about this is when I ask our clients, give me a little bit more color on this, what department are you talking about? They bring up the IRS. And I've always looked at the IRS downsizing as not particularly a bad thing. They're less likely to audit me that year. You know, it'd be nice. But what these people are doing is they've been involved with disagreements or negotiations with the IRS for a year and more. And if they downsize the department, that's just going to get worse. So there's a lot of concern about that. And that came from accountants, it came from lawyers, and it came from just general small business. But the accountants and lawyers, it was particularly acute. Lower government spending is a big one. And you all should relate to this to some degree. You see this and you think federal spending. Well, obviously that's a piece of it. But if you're worried about whether or not a federal program is going to get funded because that program funds your downstream program in the state or downstream program locally, then you're not seeing that money show up. And you're seeing the people that are downstream from those funds being much more conservative with their actions. They're holding back. So that's an issue. Medicaid cuts and lower reimbursements. This is one that we hear from the physicians, the hospitals, especially if they're in our rural areas. And we're starting to hear it from individuals, home health care professionals, nurses that take care of seniors in their homes, that kind of thing. They're worried about the reimbursement piece here. And labor shortages. This is one that I would say when I'm looking for real impacts of very visible policies, this is where we see things hitting probably the most visibly, whether it's construction, whether it's hospitality, whether it's agriculture. We are seeing that labor base being affected by deportation policy. We did have customers who said, I was raided by ICE this quarter, and I have employees that are scared to come to work. So there's a whole bunch of disagreement over whether that really affects labor availability or not. But in some cases with our client base, it is directly affecting them. Now on the pro side, we do have, I would say this is a little bit more of a nebulous concept. It's kind of down the road a little bit. But if this is the side that you fall in on, this looks like a clear target. And that would be, number one, correcting a lot of the wasteful spending that we've seen. I think that's certainly something that most people could get behind. Creating a more efficient economy, once again, that's more of an ideal. But if tariffs do work the way the administration would like them to, then you could come up with something that's a little bit more efficient and could benefit the U.S. a little bit more. And then deregulation is a big one. I think Trump's rule on that is that if you want to add a regulation, you have to eliminate 10. So you're basically seeing that pull back. You're seeing more M&A activity. I mean, I'm sure you've heard about our merger. That certainly has directly impacted us, and it didn't really have to go to our customers for that. But they see elements of this that they like because they can acquire businesses. And we have plenty of people that are getting to retirement age and they want to sell their businesses. So they're excited about this. So there are positives too. All right, let's move into margin. To me, this is probably the most interesting piece. Now, it's not a great story. If you look at this chart, you can see why. What we're asking our clients here is basically, how are your input prices faring in terms of inflation? And for the second straight quarter, our clients are saying that these prices are going up. Now, the knee-jerk reaction to this is that tariffs caused this. But that's not true. What caused this is preemptive pricing related to tariffs. Tariffs have not hit yet for the most part. When you think about what's being sold right now, it's mostly inventory that was front-loaded through the fourth quarter and the first half of this year as we imported everything that we could. You saw it in the GDP numbers. And we are selling that inventory now, and we'll burn through it, and you'll probably hit the tariff piece this quarter maybe, and then into first quarter and second quarter of 26, it'll show up pretty dramatically. So I think that this number is going to continue to go up, which is unfortunate. I'll tell you that our CFO, Jamie Gregory, was at a meeting with Dr. Bostic. I think they had a CFO dinner. And basically, what we were hearing was the same thing from the freight community, who said that they weren't seeing the tariffs show up in the merchandise that they were moving, and they too expected it in the first half of 26. So it was interesting to see it at that level and in that industry. So input prices are going up. Now, if you are like me and you're stuck on the road and you can't listen to any more college football because Georgia lost that week to Alabama or whatever, and you put it on Bloomberg, what you hear is that they're just going to pass these costs along to the client. It's that easy. You know, costs go up, fine, we'll just pass it on to the consumer. Well, that isn't the case. When we ask our clients, can they raise prices to compensate for this, we have only a fifth of them that say that they can. So that narrative about just pass it along to the customer, it isn't working. When I talk to people, and I've talked to several companies lately who are part of private equity groups, and they're in industries like RV sales or auto sales or something like that, and they tell me their outlook looks good, but it's because of manufacturers' rebates, because you're seeing the manufacturer take some of this cost out to make it more attractive to the consumer. So interesting that we can't cover the cost here from a client perspective. They would love to raise prices, let me tell you, but they're telling me that the pricing is so sensitive that if they change it at all, their customers are absolutely willing to jump ship and go to somebody else. That we are at that point where there's no more flexibility, no more elasticity in the demand piece. So this takes us to the second bonus question, because we're on the subject of tariffs, and that's where we've asked our clients, are you affected by tariffs? We had 78% of them say that they were. We've been at about 80% the past 2 quarters that we've asked it. And when we dig into this a little bit, just like we did with government policy, note that the impacts have not changed from second quarter to third quarter. Now, that would be, if you think tariffs have influenced things, that would be when you would expect the impact to come in. We don't think that, and that's exactly what you see in the results. There's almost no movement. I guarantee you that a year from now, you will see this bump up significantly, and people will move into different categories. Now, this tariff piece is super nuanced. There are a wide range of opinions, kind of like I was talking about earlier with sentiment and just, there are 1,000 shades of gray in here, and I'm going to show you a couple. The first, I'm going to start off with an anti-tariff story. We have a client who sells patio furniture that comes from Vietnam. When he first looked at the tariff structure, and this was Liberation Day, Vietnam had a 41% tariff rate applied. He was in rough shape. This was not going to work for him. Now, we have come up with a trade deal, and keep in mind that these deals, they're more agreements. They hadn't been signed for the most part. They're just agreements, but they are in place, and he's now facing a 20% tariff. So it's not as bad of a hit for him, but it is certainly 20% more than he was paying last year. So that's not good, and that would be, I think the tariff on things coming out of Vietnam were between about 1% and 3% last year, so this is real. It's real cost for him. Now, another problem with this is that he's selling a good that's heavily associated with single-family residential sales. Think about when you buy patio furniture. You either put in a pool or you bought a new house. That's pretty much when you do it. Now, I've lived in a house for a pretty good while now, and I have the worst patio furniture that you can imagine. One chair is actually black, white, and green. It's 50 years old. It's been spray painted all the time. My wife hates me to show it, so I guess she told my analyst that because she took me out of the deck. We usually show it for impact. But it is, one of those things that being correlated to single-family residential, that's an issue, and we'll hit on that in just a little bit. So looking at some other tariff impacts, I'll give you a good story. We have a customer who's in Tuscaloosa, and she is the president of a mining company. And they're pulling minerals out of the ground in Alabama, and they are selling them tariff-free to domestic producers who need those metals. And for the most part, the people to whom they are selling are importing metals. So think about what their angle is here. They are going to be able to raise their prices to just below where the imported price would be, and they're going to make more money and gain market share. So this lady loves tariffs. She wants more of them. She wants them in as quick as possible, and she wants to lock the doors on that appeals court that's looking at them. And she thinks this is fantastic. I'll give you one that falls dead in the middle. We have a client in Brunswick that makes a machine that has 2 German parts in it. The machine is produced domestically in total, except for those 2 German parts, and those 2 parts are the most expensive pieces of the machine. If we had a 50% tariff, which was the first threatened rate on the EU, then this machine would not be profitable for this customer. So his perspective was, if I can get an exception for those 2 pieces, then I'm all for it, because then I have a machine that's 98% domestically manufactured, and I'm going to kill it. But if he has to pay the tariff, then he's stuck with something that's barely making any money at all, and he's got to consider whether he wants the hassle of doing it. And his response to me when I asked him, well, what do you think the probabilities are that you can get an exception? And I imagine the line for this is longer than the Great Wall of China. That's sort of an ironic example to compare it to. But he said, what choice do I have? Because they haven't produced these 2 parts in America in 40 years. It's not fair to me to be punished economically because I can't get it here. And that's a valid point. So we'll see how that works out. And then I'll give you sort of a one-off example that's rare but interesting. You really wouldn't think of a retail store as benefiting from tariffs because what's coming in there would have tariffs embedded in the price, and of course we're all going to pass it along to the customer. So that probably wouldn't fare well for their revenues. But one place where we're seeing unreal revenues and cash inflows, and I'll show you this later, is in the used goods store section, especially in the luxury goods store section, because we as America got a little bit addicted to buying luxury goods with stimulus cash, and we still want to do that. So we're either going to charge it up on the card or we're going to go buy it used, and we're seeing those types of stores perform extremely well. All same with home furniture, anything that you can sell used and you're basically getting a decent discount on, they're doing fabulous. We also directly asked this group, what do you think of tariffs? If it's this nuanced, what bucket do you fall into? You got 44% that say negative, 34% that say neutral, 22% that say positive. Once again, I guarantee you when I show you this slide, or if I do this, in the 3rd quarter of 26, I think Matt's reserved the room for Roswell Inc. next year. I guarantee you that blue bar is going to bifurcate into the two pieces because you'll see that tariff impact hit for the most part. It won't go all the way down to nothing, of course, but it is going to pick a side. All right, moving into employment. So currently, employment is extremely static. You can see it on the same piece. Basically, 2/3 of our clients aren't doing anything employment-wise. This has been that way for a while. You heard a whole lot of media attention placed on the firing of the BLS chief and the erratic data and the revisions that were put in place. We weren't surprised by the revision numbers at all, and I'll tell you why. If you look at lower and higher, and once again, these are our clients that say this is our payroll this quarter compared to last quarter. I've got 5 quarters here, but I can go back 6 quarters. In every single quarter except one, our clients said they had a lower head count than they had a higher head count. So I don't need my Georgia Tech analyst to tell me that that means that the payrolls are coming down. That's just straight math. The one quarter where it lower didn't exceed higher, it was the same. So I do know that there is sort of a net bleed out there in terms of head count. When we look at future employment, you really don't get that much of a difference. Same comes down a little bit and it's escalating. You're seeing a little bit of a switch from those that reply higher to those that reply the same. Now, what's interesting about the higher piece is that go back to the optimism that these people put into business activity. They had 40%, 41%, 42% that thought that business is going to be better, but only 20% of them are saying that they're going to hire more people. So what does that mean? It means that they're going to do more with less. That's just common sense. And there are a couple of reasons why they're going to do this. Number one, these clients can't find the labor that they need. We hear this repeatedly on blue-collar labor. It's been an issue since COVID, but this quarter, it's the first time that we've heard our clients say they can't find qualified professional white-collar labor. So that's lawyers, that's architects, that's CPAs. There aren't enough of them out there, and we see good performance in those service industries, but the labor isn't there. When I think about the blue-collar piece, there's a guy that owns a golf range down in Florida, and he was just looking for general help, fix the ball hopper, pick up whatever. He couldn't find anything. He bought what he calls a golf robot. Haven't seen this. I'm going to ask him to send me a picture. But it's funny to me that, this is a small-time golf range it isn't Top Golf. It's just your old-school local golf range. And they've got a robot helping because they can't find the people. I will also say, going back to the ICE piece, the ag component, the hospitality, auto repair, construction have all been hit by this. And if there's one type of labor that nobody wants, it would be inexperienced white-collar labor. If any of you have kids in college that are looking to get a job, that job market is horrible now. You think about who's getting hired by companies. It's usually someone who has interned or co-opted with that company. That's how every single one of my analysts that I've hired for the past 6 years has come in. You want them to prove something before you hire them because it's so difficult to really pull the trigger on something right now in the environment that we're in. Now, the other situation beyond can't find the labor that they need is they can't afford the labor that they need. And that has to do with that margin compression again. So think about how you attack that problem. The first thing you would do as a company is you would cut down on your SKUs and the services that you offer. That's number one. I don't know how many of you have been out to a full-service restaurant lately. Your favorite place is, sort of a local place that you love. Go and look at the menu. I guarantee you the main menu's gone from about 10 items to 6, and there's some value proposition there, like a fixed price item or something like that. You're seeing selection drop and values being pushed. Margin is not the most important thing right now. It's actually volume. And if they can just keep the engine running, not necessarily make a profit, but keep the engine running, that's good enough for right now. So we're hearing that. We're also seeing companies triage their customer list for profitability. So what I mean by that is, let's say I've got Cal Evans Air Conditioning and I have 10 customers and they're all profitable. I may cut out the bottom 3 or 4 and concentrate on the ones at the top. That's just good business. Everybody does that. But in this environment where margin and volume is so important, you're going to concentrate on that higher piece. And think about what the result of that is. if I cut 3 people that rely on my services, and they would be commercial operators, these aren't residential people, then they've got to go to a new supplier. And they probably are going to find somebody less reliable and more expensive. So that erodes their margin even more. So it creates what I call a small business margin spiral as they triage that profitability piece. And that's why scale is so important here. That's why the responses that you see from small business in this survey are so different from what you see amongst our wholesale clients, because the larger clients are so much more resilient in the face of these pressures than the small businesses are. Now, one thing that also helps would be automation, and that would include AI. When we ask our clients, are they using it, we have about 70% that say no and 30% that say yes. Initially, I was surprised at this, but as I became more familiar with the background and saw the narrative responses, it started to make a little bit more sense. But let's dig into this on the bottom chart. What we're seeing is that the number that have cited a minor impact or no impact has dropped a little bit, and we've seen moderate impact pick up. And what I'm hearing in our narrative responses to the survey is that our clients that use AI have sort of graduated from that piece where it's summarizing a news article, organizing their email, or they used it to write a country song about some guy that they just wanted to mess with that day. That's what you do with AI when you first get it. They have moved on to the next level, and that is replacing expense. And what's being replaced by AI is marketing, comms, social media creation, payroll, admin help, research, those kinds of things. And who does that affect? It goes back to affecting that young worker, the gig worker, that kind of person gets pressured here. Now, I was in a market about 3 weeks ago, and I made this point, and a guy came up to me and he goes, I own a social media content creation company. And he goes, I've had customers come to me and say, I'm going to pull back. And his response has been that he lowered prices for them and retained them. Guess how he lowered prices? He's using AI to create their media content. So it's funny to see this circular machination going on with AI, because not only do we see it there, we see it in academics where teachers are mad at students because they're using AI to write their papers, but the students are mad at the teachers because they're using AI to grade them. This is just what we're going to deal with as we work through it. All right, so that is the survey piece of it. Let's get into the math, and I hate to put you through math at 12:10, like 20, 30 minutes after you finished your sandwich. That's probably cruel. But let me explain how this works. So what we do on this inflow-outflow analysis is we aggregate all of our commercial deposit accounts by NAICS code, which is the North American Industry Classification System. So NAICS, the way we look at NAICS is 2-digit. Over on the right-hand side, they're very broad categories like retail, manufacturing, construction, very broad. And we also look at it on a 6-digit basis, which is getting down in the weeds, and I'll show you that in just a second. But what it looks like is over here on the left. That blue line is a proxy for revenues. It's the inflows. The red line is a proxy for outflows or expense or potentially inflation. And what you see is that for most of 2024 and 25, you've basically just got a static line where nothing's really going up or down much. A 0.3% increase is nothing. That is literally just the year-over-year comparison of how much more money or less money came into that account, and it's just 0.3%. That shows to some degree the stagnation that we're seeing in the economy. Now, it does seem to be picking up a touch, which would validate what the Fed's regional economic team said.
You're talking about the spread between the two lines.
No, not the spread. What I'm talking about, I don't focus on the spread. The spread is actually irrelevant in this case. Okay. It's look at the blue piece as just those are the revenues. The red piece would be those are the expenses. Growth on those two. Now, you could, if you do have the red line outpacing the blue line, so the gap there would indicate some evidence of inflation, but it's kind of tightened up a little bit. So let me show you how this looks at the 6-digit level, and this is what we focus on. And I'm going to start with manufacturing 32 and give you some examples, and I think this will all make sense to you. The purpose of showing you this is so you could know what kind of businesses are succeeding now and which ones should succeed over the next year or two. So manufacturing is probably not something that you really want right now, especially if it's associated with single-family residential construction. What's not doing well? Sawmills down 15%. Window and door manufacturers down 18%. Paving down 16%. Plywood down 22%. If you got to build a house, you're not selling anything for the most part. What is good? Infrastructure components, chemicals, things like that. Think about being on the interstate. I feel like I'm there all the time. Whenever you're behind some big truck hauling something, 3 or 4 years ago, it was hauling roof trusses and lumber. Now it's hauling huge pipes and things like that. You're noticing a difference on what's shipping. So this manufacturing piece is negative and has been beat up pretty badly over the past year and a half. Now, I want to go closer to the consumer as we go through this. But before I do that, let me show you, this is the Institute of Supply Management's Manufacturing Purchase Managers Index. And that's basically just like the survey that I showed you, business volume, employment, things like that. But what this is showing, if it's below that gray line, which is 50, this is what we call a diffusion index in the nerd world where I live. And if it's below 50, that means economic contraction. If it's above 50, it means economic expansion. So this is the manufacturing industry. Look when it started to drop, when rates went up. Makes perfect sense. More expensive to borrow, more expensive to expand, it sinks. Then you see it basically stay low as we're in a high rate environment, and look when it pops back up. The second we cut rates, and then immediately afterwards when Trump gets elected, because his administration is highly supportive of the manufacturing effort. So this does include sort of a look forward component. Look what happened after that. You hit about January, it starts to go down because tariffs, fears of tariffs start to hit. So what we're seeing nationally is reflecting exactly what we're seeing regionally. This is not surprising at all. Let's go closer to the consumer here and look at transportation. NAICS 48 is transportation. The warehousing is 49. But if you look specifically at what's performing poorly here, general freight down 4%, truckload shipping down 5%, less than truckload shipping down 9%. We're just not seeing the freight move for various reasons. One, consumption has backed off a little bit. Two, we had so much activity on the front end of the year, front-loading goods, that slowed down a little bit. But when you break down the cost of this shipping, you see evidence in the supply chain. And there's a measure that we track called the Cass Freight Index. And what I see is shipments are down 9%, expenditures are down 0.4%. So we're basically paying more to ship less. So that supply chain inflation that I showed you that our customers are experiencing is being experienced across all industries for the most part, and you certainly see it show up in transportation. Now let's get to the consumer and look at retail trade. Retail trade has come out of a deep hole in our area. The reason that it is very negative has to do with the fact that it was so positive coming off of COVID. So you've got a relative drop in there. And when you look at what's doing well and what's not, new cars are up 2%. Go back the past 4 or 5 quarters, they were up 15%, 20%. A lot of that had to do with people going out and buying their luxury car or their SUV before the tariffs hit. A whole lot of front-loading purchase of that. Where you see real weakness would be in the used car section. Inflow's down 17% here. This has been a factor for a long time now. And when we ask our used car dealers what's going on with that, they're saying that their more cost-conscious consumer can't afford to go buy a $35,000 used sedan at a 9 or 10% interest rate when they're in a single-parent household or something like that. You just can't do it. So that's coming down significantly. When you look at industries, once again, associated with housing, appliances down, floor covering down, window treatments down. Those all correspond to what we've talked about earlier. And when you look at the discretionary categories, like motorcycles, ATV dealers, boat dealers, down 5%, 13%. These are the, I call them the big boy toys that people bought so much of with stimulus funds. And I'll tell you a little anecdote. It's slightly racy, so you can edit it out of the video. But my analyst, lead analyst, her name is Brooke Blackwell, and she lives in LaGrange. And she lives in this idyllic neighborhood. It's beautiful. All the streets are named after flowers and things. They all have golf carts. They have street parties. Everybody knows each other. and she bought a golf cart. And when we were looking at this industry, I used the phrase big boy toys, and she said, you know, I don't really appreciate that because I bought my golf cart with my own money, and you're basically making it an inherently male purchase when you call it a big boy toy. And I said, okay, that's fair. You know, I appreciate it. Maybe I'm paying you a little bit much, but that's fair. And I said, I will think about what we can call it. I said, how about adult toys? And she goes, no, that's much, much, much worse. That conversation actually happened, and we just call it big boy toys now to needle each other. So that's retail, but not all retail is performing poorly. We do have some good categories, and it's interesting what they are. Used merchandise dealers, like I said, up 12%. That's the highest performing category we have with more than 100 deposit accounts in the bank. It's just killing it. I think the second or third is actually weight loss clinics, which also makes a lot of sense. Jewelry retailers up 6%. Basically, any retail component that's highly focused at an upper income group, and this goes for services too, has been really resilient to these economic pressures. So if it's aimed at upper income, it's usually doing pretty well. If it's just general discretionary goods, hobby toys and games down 1%, sporting goods down 7%, musical instruments down 12%. Once again, a lot of this stuff was loaded up on post-COVID, and it's highly discretionary now, so people aren't buying it. Looking at retail commercial real estate, and I'm going to take a hard right, I guess I just used my left hand, hard right, and show you a few stats because I think that these are important in looking at what you want to attract here. And on retail, we talked about the upper income piece. When I look at Atlanta occupancy rates, you look low on the scale, but it's a 96% occupancy rate, which is amazing. 4% rent growth for this quarter. So really, really good performance in Atlanta. When you look at whether or not tenants are paying the rent, this is from a company called Datex. We followed this very closely after COVID. We're at almost record highs. You've got 95% of all tenants paying on time, 91% of locals. That's a very, very high number. 93% for national tenants. So really, really good numbers on that end. And you would think that with excellent occupancy and excellent rent growth and excellent credit, that you would just see more and more retail because the demand has been there. But when you dig into what's been built, and this is nationally, you basically see that supply has been dropping, it's been low period, and it's just going to continue to drop. And you've got to wonder, well, what is going on with that? And really what it comes down to is that the rents aren't high enough to justify the construction. So to do that, you have got to build a product that is going to command a higher rent. And in my opinion, you see that in the mixed-use communities that you've built. We saw it at Southern Post. I saw it at Halcyon down the road a little bit. Things like that, those kinds of upper-end mixed-use developments where you have a hotel, where you have office, where you have multifamily that can sort of boost that demand a little bit and make a retail market captive, that's all positive. So that's something that I would highly recommend. So I'm going to move into services now. We're through the manufacturing and the goods part, which are generally negative. Although we're negative in this category, I really don't focus that much on that because some categories are pulling it down like mortgage finance. But what's doing well, this won't surprise anybody, insurance. With rates through the roof, you would expect these inflows to be high. They are. It's exactly what we see, but this isn't, don't confuse that with profit because that money is going to go up to the mothership or go out to pay claims. Where we see real profit, wealth categories, investment banking up 4%, portfolio management up 8%. That goes right back to servicing that upper income piece. Now this does correlate a lot with the market performance, which has been pretty good, but once again, servicing that category is a big one. When we look at real estate, and I know I've beat up on single-family residential pretty hard here, if we're not selling houses, then you got to live somewhere. So what are we doing? We're renting, and we are heavily renting. So when I look at residential leasing, property management, self-storage, anything that's associated with that rental market, it's doing well and has done well for a while. I will say that I want to use this as a springboard to jump into multifamily because when I was talking about mixed use, I think that living piece is a big component of it. And I'll show you what you're dealing with in Atlanta. You've got a whole bunch of units that were put on the market in 2024, about 25,000. That was an all-time record. We'll deliver about 20,000 roughly this year, and then that'll drop about 50% in 26, which we need. We need that pretty badly. We've over-delivered. This little chart down at the bottom. That blue dotted line is the average percentage of inventory that's delivered into a market each year. And if you're above that, then we have a little bit of concern. You guys are way above it, twice what it is. So it's going to be good to see those units come down. And you would think that when you have that much supply, that you would see occupancy and rent growth affected. It's just simple supply and demand. If we go back a year ago, we look at Atlanta occupancy, 92%, rent growth minus 4%. Let's skip ahead to this year. Wow, Atlanta's at 94% occupancy and rent growth is just slightly negative at 0.3%. How does that happen when we deliver 25,000 units one year and 20,000 units the next? Well, the reason that it happens is that you can't afford to buy a single-family home. There's no affordable option. And what this shows on the black bars are basically home sales. The blue line shows mortgage rates. If you look at where those black bars spike after the rate hike cycle, which is when you see those home sales get low, each time they spike, mortgage rates were right at 6%. That rate gets close to 6%, you start to see people move into the market. If it gets down to 5.5 or 5, every single industry that I've said that is bad because of its association with single-family residential will do well. It's just going to happen. So, I hope we get there, but I don't see it coming anytime soon with the slow pace of rate movements and also the fact that the Fed has a dual mandate. They've got to look at employment, but they've also got to look at inflation. And while labor may give them the means that they need to lower rates, we are pretty sure we're going to see some more inflation when those tariffs hit in the first half of the year. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance that. So rate, which determines payment, is really the most important thing, and you can't afford a home for the most part. Now, there's also supply, and we pulled this for Roswell. I thought this was pretty interesting. What we've got here is a scatter plot. It's showing square footage on the bottom and thousands of dollars on the y-axis. And what you see when you're looking at new home sales, like what's sold and what's available, you're looking at a house that's about 3,000 to 7,000 square feet with a price between $1 and $3 million. Well, guess what? That's real hard to get a young professional adult to come into this market and find a place to live. So they're going to go to an apartment. There's just not an affordable alternative. And when you look at the inventory piece, if you get into that 250 to 450 range where that entry point would be, you've got a big deficit. So the challenge here is getting some affordable housing, and I think that multifamily, despite the fact that it's been oversupplied, is part of the answer, and mixed use is very attractive to this younger professional group that you probably want to attract. And that young professional group, we see a lot of them coming out of the colleges. We have a lot of research relationships with our universities. One of them is UGA, and Ben Ayers, who was the dean there, he's now second to Dr. Moorhead now, but he would let us survey the students, and we would ask them what their plans were after college, housing-wise. You moving in with your mom and dad, you're going to get a roommate, you're going to buy a house, whatever. Well, this year, we got a response on, are you going to buy a house? And we put the entry-level price in there. We only had 14 people that said that they were going to buy a home, and I thought that was very low for the thousands of people that leave the University of Georgia. So I called Ben and I said, this number just seems real low to me. What's up with that? And he goes, well, you really shouldn't be surprised. It's a matter of public record. You can pull it up on Google. There they are, all 14 exiting students that can afford that entry-level home. Now, we didn't do a survey. I have to make that qualifier because I actually did it with Ben Ayers in the audience one time, and I could see him getting shifty. But anyway, you get the point. You can't afford it, and you're trying to attract young professionals and young families to your market, but you don't have the housing to do it. Multifamily, build to rent to some degree, can be an attractive alternative. So let me switch back to the inflow piece, and we're in the home stretch here. Professional, scientific, and technical services all doing pretty well. CPA's up. Vet services up 2%. I have a Greyhound, adopted it from the Ackworth kennel. They would bring in the Greyhounds when they were racing. They have horrible teeth. And I took my greyhound to the dentist. It costs $1,500 to get that dog's teeth cleaned. Only pulled 2. So I know those vets are making a bunch of money. 1% of that is probably mine. And an interesting side note that has nothing to do with this, I was talking to my vet about this. It's amazing if you have subject matter expertise in real estate or finance, your doctor or veterinarian will talk to you as long as you want. That's one thing I've found. But my vet told me that he's one of 2 vets out of the 15 in Columbus that is not owned by a private equity group. That's telling. So think about your small businesses. Are they really small? You know, you kind of got to dig into that when you do these kinds of things. But what I want to focus on here is what's doing poorly. Advertising agencies down 6%. HR consulting down 11%. This makes total sense. We know that AI is replacing some of the ad spend, and we know that nobody's hiring, so why would you need this, or executive search firms, or whatever? So we're definitely seeing those pieces affected. Looking at healthcare and social assistance, this is doing very well. Physicians up 4%. We're also seeing assisted living and skilled nursing pop up to 3%. That's great. It has taken a while for those types of projects to get past where they were pre-COVID, but they're beyond that and they're performing very well now. I'm a big fan of those communities. You know, your psych and peace is very heavy right now. We also watch child care services real closely. It's negative. It's been negative for a long time. And for me, it is a bellwether for the lower middle to lower income group, because if you have your children in daycare and you fall in that category, if you get pinched, then the first thing you're going to do is put your child with grandma. And so you see these groups get affected almost immediately when there's pressure on that income group. And that income group is getting waxed. If you ask people, are we in a recession, think about who's telling you no. Well, they look like me, and they're on TV, and they look like y'all. Go find the people who fall into this child care category. They will not tell you that things are good. They will say that you're in some form of a recession. Now, these types of trades demand office. Office is the dumpster fire in the country, and it is not great in Atlanta. It's the worst in our footprint at a 75% occupancy last year, but it has a slight bit of growth. It really didn't change much in the scooting back up a year. Rent is a little bit better, but that really is driven by leases that are signed. And what kind of leases do you sign? Well, you sign the ones that can actually lease. They're good properties. They have the cool things, you know, the kegerator and the golf range. And we have a Formula One simulator in our new building. Just this kind of stuff that you put on it to lease. That's why you are seeing some positive momentum. Now, what's interesting to me about this, whoops, let me go back one. And I think this affects you guys. So when I look at occupancy rates in this green box and rent growth, you're looking at occupancy rates of about 85% to almost fully occupied, rent growth from about 2% to 4%. Those are extraordinarily positive office numbers given this environment. And what do most of these markets have in common? They're mainly secondary or tertiary markets, small markets. Their growth is centered in a downtown community core, and it is a suburban area that tends to either be the core of activity. And when I think about that, I think of like a Pensacola, or I think of I think Mobile was on here. Augusta is a good example. Columbus is a good example. Those kinds of things. Or you can dig into this a little bit further, and you can look at these suburban communities that have the feel of a community, and that's so important. So when I look at Atlanta and I think about where would I want to live, Roswell feels like its own town. There are a few of these, and you do see excellent performance metrics in those towns where you have good economic development progress. You have people that are really working on it like you all are. Like I said when I started this, driving into Roswell, you see these things. It has a community feeling. You could bring your family here. I'd bring my wife here. I'm not dying to do that in a lot of other places in Atlanta. So this smaller piece can succeed on the office front, and once again, it's hedged a little bit better when you have some sort of live-work relationship mixed-use piece. And when I look at the success of suburban office, it's outperformed CBD by a mile. The thing that we point to is the battery. That's easy. You know, everybody's got we kind of laugh about all you got to do is get a pro sports team. But the funny thing is, you guys can, and Forsyth can and some others, it's amazing who can actually pull that in. These are big demand generators that can pull people into your core. So that's another thing that helps. And then once again, I mean, this is an example of what leases. This is our office in Columbus. You've got this amazing living room space, their video games. I like to joke that HR should have a camera right over those video games to figure out who they need to target on their efficiency exercises, because I don't think I've ever played 1 minute of Pac-Man. And then you've got the beautiful outdoor patio that overlooks the river. This is what people want. They want new stuff with amenities and a smaller footprint, and this moves. And in a market like this where you're building newer mixed-use communities, I think that looks really good. All right, so to wrap this up, what are we looking for in all this? Well, it's clarity, and that's why we ask our clients repeatedly. They're probably sick of it. What is going on? How do you feel about things? We want to know the pulse of what they're thinking. We can also, we know what they're saying. Then we can look and see how they're doing, and that's what that inflow piece does. It gives a real check on their financial health and how the companies are doing and which industries are doing better. So that's giving us more clarity. As we move through this year, we're getting more clarity on government policy. We don't have the clarity on tariffs quite yet. It's eking out, and we'll have more of that as we go. But we're certainly gaining a little bit more clarity as we go, and we're seeing people step off the sideline. So that could prompt some economic generation. And in a market where you do have good supporting incomes, good supporting in-migration, they can perform extremely well. And this is one of the communities, just like when we did the Roswell Inc. deal and we were at Southern Post, you could look right out of the window and give an example of what works. It's that development looks good, or the parking facility that's right across the street that'll service downtown and the restaurants and everything. That's what I like. There are tons of examples all over the region. They all have their own little special elements, but really it's that community feel that tends to drive it, and new product. So with that, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Happy to take some questions. If y'all got any.
Thank you, Cal. Couple quick things. I mean, the reason that the last 10, 15 minutes is what really caught my eye as I listened to this. I had to get through all the other parts to prove that he was as smart as I thought he was. But, those sort of set the stage. But there were a few industries that seemed that we should focus on that are growth industries. There are a few models of development that work well. And there are some, like just building an office complex is not going to do it. So one of the things that I picked up last time, and I'd like you guys to give me feedback or questions, that is nodes that concentrate demand, living, those kinds of things, the mixed use, that's the key. And so for our economic model and what we talked about, I think we had the map out here last time, we have these nodes, downtown, midtown, and uptown, and east side that we're trying to create that community feel. We have signed an MOU with USL. I want to talk briefly about that. Tell you what that does mean, what it doesn't mean, and what it means to our work as a committee, what we're thinking, what we're trying to accomplish on behalf of the citizens with the city. We signed an MOU which gives us an opportunity to attract a team. That's all it is. It's just a commitment for them to bring a team to Roswell if certain things are true. And those things include an ownership group that has the capital to pull it off. That's one. In this particular instance, we've negotiated that the league itself will be that capital group. They're going to be the initial owners of that opportunity. The second thing that has to be true is there has to be a facility that is surrounded by a mixed-use environment, right? So that's our requirement, not theirs as far as the mixed use. But the stadium they have to have, obviously, and certain things that go along with the stadium, like, for instance, the opportunity to program it, use it beyond just a team. So we are using it for our purposes. We're thinking about it for the purpose of driving an economic area like he's talking about. And then also, what we're doing here at Hill Street, for instance, is we're focused on bringing in high-end retailers, which have been very resilient in this market. We're focused on high-end retailers and high-end service providers, wealth management, those kinds of things would be in the office environment. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. And that's what caught my eye in this conversation. So I'll throw it out to you guys. Any questions? Yes, sir, George?
One of the first things the gentleman said was that a lot of things that they depend on is the input from the client base. They do surveys, input. So something of this magnitude, wouldn't it make sense, just like we did with the bonds, to have meetings before we get to this point, to draw somebody in? Or do you feel that we need to have this in concrete to present to the people and say, hey, look, we already got this set up, then what do you think?
That's a great question. It's particularly, you're talking about the USL opportunity?
Yeah, what you just talked about, yeah.
Yeah. So there is no commitment on the city's part to do anything at the moment. Without the city, without the residents' input, nothing will happen. What we have is an opportunity to negotiate.
But that's what I'm asking. Which comes first? Does it make more sense
Yeah.
to get the, well, let me clarify my question, because I don't think he heard me. I'm not saying I like it, don't like it, I'm just asking here to get a process
Right.
from what he said
Yeah.
and what you're saying. So I'm just asking the question, which do you think should come first?
If I could just interject here. So, we did, Together Roswell, which was our strategic, input plan. We had over 2,500 residents, over 7,000, individual comments, basically that defined the residents' vision of our strategic direction. And it had multiple components. Economic development was part of it. And part of economic development includes mixed use. It includes catalytic things, perhaps like a stadium. People wanted entertainment. That was all captured in that and about 5 other surveys or projects that we did, like the transportation master plan, the bike ped master plan, what's the parks one called? It's the comp plan that comes every 5 years. So we have ad nauseum gone to the public through hundreds and thousands of dollars and gotten input. And part of this is acting and following through on what the residents want. Now, as far as specific things like the USL
MOU?
Stadium,
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of an economic driver.
Mhm.
And that's perhaps what you're asking. It's like, okay, the residents want this, but maybe we should ask them more questions, like what things they want around it. Is that what you're asking?
No, if you're answering my question by saying we've already done that, now you've answered my question. That was my only question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not trying to
I
make it
think,
more complicated than it
you
is,
know
I
what,
just wanna know.
there's so much stuff out there that people fail
I'm
to
not
recognize.
other people, just talking about me, my question.
No,
I'm
I
not
know,
trying to
but-
make it anything, I
But
don't have
this
any
is
hidden
for the,
agenda or anything.
this
It's
is
fine.
for the crowd,
Yeah.
that so many people just have forgotten about all of this outreach and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars that's been done on it. And these are available on the site, so.
Yeah, and, as an economic liaison for the council, I feel like my obligation is to generate opportunities for the city, okay? And then the residents get to decide on those opportunities when they become real. At the moment, an MOU it means memorandum of understanding. We have basically a general understanding that if these things happen and these facts are in play with regard to the economics, then we'll do this together. It's nothing more than that. And so I think that as a body, sort of what Stroud does, go out there and find opportunities to the city, bring them back, and then the residents get to speak to them at that time. So I would say, I think we did it in the right order.
Has Synovus been doing this for a long time?
We've done the survey for a little over 3 years.
And have diagnostics changed at all, or is it relatively
Yeah,
the same?
yeah. We fine-tuned elements of it as we've gone. Some of them would be to eliminate, you may have a tiny bit of bias that may be in a question that you don't recognize on the front end, and you see it in the responses. We've added to it considerably through the years, but especially this past year with the executive action piece, the tariff piece, and the AI piece. So those were not in the original portions of the survey.
And I'm sure next year will be different because of that as well.
Well, we'll continue to track them. It's sort of a balance between, you want to get the new stuff, but you want to keep the old stuff tracked as well. So we'll continue to have those questions, but to your point, I'm sure something will pop up that we'll be asking
But
about.
has there been a feel in the past and even currently that there's more of a weight on the qualitative rather than the quantitative?
Well, there's very little quantitative in it.
That's right.
Yeah, well, it would be really difficult to get the quantitative. And we get the quantitative from the inflow analysis. And I'll say this, being very frank, I love our respondents. But when the bank asks you how your business is doing and the bank has lent you money, you tend to be a little bit more positive. So I like to go rely on the numbers
No, that's
as a fact check.
trying to get at it.
Yeah.
But to date, simply on a reality, you've had to rely on that qualitative more than the outcomes.
Yeah, I think so, but I'll tell you, some of that has to do with my own preference. I would rather hear the anecdotes, know what stories are going on in these businesses. I travel around all over the place and talk to these customers all the time, and getting the little nuggets about the lady who has the mining company in Tuscaloosa or the guy in Brunswick, and there are hundreds of those that show up in the survey. Those really give, when you go out and you do this kinds of things, real tangible examples that people can grab onto and empathize with a lot better than just, they don't like tariffs, they do like tariffs. So I tend to rely a little bit more on that.
The mixed-use data that you were talking about before, and how it's especially appropriate at this time to have the dynamic. Does that have rub-off on the success of the occupants, whether it's retail or hotel, in those types of environments as well? Is there a correlation to success?
Sure, are you talking about within the interrelated types in the mixed-use development?
Yeah, if you had
Hotel
a
do
mixed
better.
use, yeah.
Yeah.
Will there be a positive ripple on
Yes.
those facilities?
Now, you would have to, if you did a quantitative analysis on that, you'd have to come up with some adjustment for location, of course. But in general, yes. And the retail is especially benefited if you have a live component in there. Because what it does is it takes that development from a 12-hour retail center to an 18 to 24-hour development. And you've got more people using it more during the day.
Do
So,
those centers
yes.
have the ability, or they have the ability to, do they have success in attracting a higher quality occupant as well of a retailer?
Well, that would really depend on what the developer is trying to develop. Now, I would not encourage anyone to develop something that's aimed at the middle of the income spectrum right now, or the bottom end, obviously. I think you've got to go to the upper end. That's the most resistant piece. That's where the demand base is. When you look at hotels, for example, and you look where RevPAR, which is revenue per available room, that's occupancy times the rate, that's the metric we use. The only segment where we see it positive would be in the luxury segment, the boutique section, and the very, very upper end of mid-scale, very upper end. So that is, that upper end of mid-scale is generally the type of hotel that you would see if you had one attached to this development. Maybe a little bit better if it was something that was, if you could support the kind of rates where you had a big driver. It's hard to get a smaller community to drive large hotel rates unless there's something there special. Athens is a good example. They can get $1,000 a night during a football game, if not more. But to your question, most all of the types should benefit, but especially retail. If you can lock in the residential component, then you have a captive demand base.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you address what we hear a lot from our service providers like restaurants is their labor force and housing for that labor force. And basically, I don't, people can't afford to live here, so I can't hire them. How do you balance that? What do you do with that?
Well, that's a tough one, and we particularly see that in our coastal communities where you have a recreational or a leisure element that's heavily driven by tourism, and that's a rough one they're either gonna have to commute a long way in. What I've seen is that I've seen middle to lower scale multifamily developments that may be built just far enough away, to where they can be somewhat close, but it isn't prime real estate. But I don't know how well that works in Roswell. It works fine in Destin, Florida, when you can go 15 miles up the road and you're in a jungle. But, so that,
We're 42 square miles.
yeah, exactly. And
And we're still in North Fulton.
yeah, but I mean, really, what we're hearing is you're seeing more and more automation, and you're seeing more and more people who own the business are in the business. I mean, there isn't a whole, I think you're seeing a little bit of a decrease in, I've got my restaurant manager, and I'm not going to be present in that restaurant. You're seeing the people who own it are much more involved now to preserve margin. That helps a little bit, but that's an issue that everybody's facing, and there's no easy answer.
And that's regardless where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Especially what you're saying about those leisure communities where you
Yeah.
have to attract from a long way to a small group that's high.
Yeah, I mean, take like downtown Miami. I don't know how they do it. I mean,
Yeah.
you go see the bellhop at the hotel there, and you think, we're nowhere
Former
near.
CEO.
Yeah, well, that's a tough problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
As someone who sits in Columbus, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see Atlanta out 20 years from now? Is it still because I think it's very relevant to Roswell. I mean, Roswell's trying to create its own economy and has its own economy, but at the same time, I think it's always going to be somewhat, if not very much, tied to the fortunes of the greater Atlanta region. How do you see that playing out over 25 years?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think it continues to expand. It may be that sort of definition of the community becomes a little bit tighter as the range of the city gets larger and larger. I mean, I think about communities like Monroe that 15 years ago I would have never associated with Atlanta. It's Atlanta now, basically. That is going to continue to happen. And the sprawl here is extreme. I mean, the thing that it sort of makes me think about, and it's tough to say 25 years down the road, but Houston comes to mind, where it's just almost like another perimeter, another perimeter, another perimeter. I mean, I drove across Houston and was in the car for 3 hours and was not in traffic. One time going to the Space Center. I think you see that where you get more definition of the regions within the town that, become a little bit more.
So like London is a city of villages.
That's probably a good example.
Yeah.
But as far as, continued in-migration, continued economic power, I think that certainly continues.
Really
Yeah. I don't see that. I don't see that going anywhere.
Still the capital of the South from the economy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even if it's not banking anymore, whatever, we still got some juice in it.
Well, I mean, you've got massive juice with tech now. And just, pre-COVID, it was the entertainment industry with movies. Still got it in music. I mean, Atlanta has such a diverse economy. It is not finance and law. It's not 1990. It's impressive, the range that they've developed.
And so for us as a city, this is more to a point of trying to develop opportunities for the residents to look at. We're talking with a university to bring a tech center as both an employer and a driver of creative employers here in Roswell. So we're deep into those conversations to try to develop that opportunity that we can then say to the residents, okay, now we have this opportunity and we have this, we're trying to find a place for it, where does it work, what needs to be around it. So that's what I see as my role. I'm a board member, right? I don't do anything, I don't fill any potholes, I don't have anything to do with anything that actually gets done in the city. What do boards do? They allocate capital, they create opportunity, and they make connections. That's what boards do, and that's what this board is responsible to do, is bring that back to the residents through processes like this and say, okay, what do we see happening here? In light of, this was a pretty data-rich, notwithstanding the qualitative interpretation, which I would argue, because of the data and his skills, is probably 99.9% pure like Ivory Snow or whatever, he's probably pretty good on that. And those are the kinds of things that as he brought this down, building another office complex is a dead letter. Quite frankly, building a standalone hotel is a dead letter unless you have some nobody's coming to Roswell to stay for a Braves game. Okay? Nobody's coming to Roswell to stay for, something at the Civic Center. So we have to have some drivers that bring those hotels. And if you look at the opportunities we try to develop behind West Alley, that's going to be a boutique hotel. Those are the kinds of things we're focused on. They have to be really focused on the kind of customer that we have here, which is the economics of Roswell probably do better than I. And it's probably,
I doubt that one, but.
It's pretty darn, the downtown real estate is going for well over $3 million an acre. So, man.
Just a follow-up question on the housing, where you indicated, you had the chart where it shows the million plus, for the homes and the need for the multifamily. Is that, so that's the people, when you talk about the nurses need a place to live and the police officers and firemen, that's the housing for them that basically where they're going.
Yeah, a good example of that is take Noonan. If you drive through there, they've had a huge multifamily development wave, but it has allowed them to staff the new Piedmont there, the cancer center there, those kinds of things.
So that's exactly what the track that we're on.
But the trick is land there was a lot cheaper when they started doing it than it is here. So can you get the rents to support it? And I think that's where mixed use comes in a little bit better because you're sort of hedging your bets, or you're making a bigger bet depending on how you look at it. But
So
you get my point.
we're also in conversations, another opportunity we're trying to bring along to bring to the residents is, we have a big healthcare practice here in Roswell. And working with the healthcare provider to create opportunities for housing for nurses, just really like hoteling, I guess is the best way to describe it, where they have a complex that is specifically devoted to those, because they have a lot of people like visiting nurses or traveling nurses, I can't remember the term. We're looking at that with them, and they would basically be the developer, and we would be providing, sort of the oversight of the project and things like that. So those are the kinds of things we're working on. So any other big questions about, as we think about this next 40 years, or how long? This is my first one, so I've never done this before. You have 10 years.
It's a minor upgrade every 5.
No, but how long are we supposed to be looking out?
Oh,
It's a 40-year plan.
right,
Yeah, well, my 40-year plan doesn't involve Roswell. That's 63.
Are we doing the 2040?
20-year plan.
Yeah, we're doing the 2040 now, so
Okay.
20 years.
All right.
So,
Just kind of at a macro level, thematically, it seemed like a lot of the data in your commentary about future results is that the tariff impact is yet to come, but it's expected to be generally negative. I'll use that word. And I get it, there were data points, but I think the numbers said generally negative. At a national level, that doesn't seem to be the prognosis, and I say that simply because the markets digested it, and a lot of, at least, what I hear, and this may be more about stock price,
Mhm.
is that the impact isn't going to be as bad as people maybe thought. So I'm just curious if you think that's a geographical thing, or if you think that's the data tells the true story, and some of the talking heads just, are sharing their opinions, not data-driven.
That's a tough one to answer. I'll try. So when I think about tariffs, I'm not giving you a level of, this is how much pain tariffs are going to cause. What I'm saying is we haven't felt any of the pain, and we don't know what the degree of that pain is going to be. It's going to vary across sectors and regions. So it is not as simple as the U.S. looks at tariff pain as a 4 on a 10-point scale, or the frowny face when you go to the doctor and they ask you how much pain you're in. That thing, I think it's going to be highly regional, highly industry specific. And it's in flux. I mean, these deals, and that's what they are, deals, for the most part, haven't been signed yet. And they're still large components that have not been agreed upon, like international investment pieces, whether or not they're going to invest in the U.S. A lot remains to be resolved, which is why you're not going to see me make a whole lot of concrete predictions in this thing. What do I personally think about it? Well, I'm a free trade guy. I hope it wasn't horribly evident in that presentation. I don't like tariffs unless it's protecting our intellectual property. I think that there are ways that we can work with industries in foreign countries to mutually benefit. And there was a great article, I think it was in The Economist, talking about how the Scotch industry in Scotland works with the bourbon industry in Kentucky to basically pay no tariffs. It's unreal, and they can show the economic benefits in both countries. So I think there's a lot of that to be determined. I think that if something that could impact it is, when are these impacts going to hit? Well, there's probably going to be the first half of next year, the degree of which will probably heavily influence midterms. I think he probably would have rather had those tariffs hit hard on the first part of this year so they could smooth it out and make it feel better heading into midterms. That's going to be interesting to see. And that will trickle over into government policy decisions and things like that, because he can't be elected again, so he basically can do whatever he wants to right now. And how long will the parties support that if you do see a big midterm backlash? So all those things affect what would happen. I think that a lot of people look at tariffs and think, okay, well, they'll be in place for 3 years, and then we'll repeal them all. But it's not that simple. I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people. If you have them in place, you're going to have a lot of trade groups that get used to them, and they'll lobby for it. And, we have, the administration has taken some actions that are fairly unprecedented. And what that has done has shown the other side how to do it too. And I'm not naive enough to think that everybody just, becomes, like they're just going to work together better in 3 years. I think that now the blueprint's out there to shift it dramatically, however you want to. But once again, that's my bias coming in there.
It's not only being used as an economic policy, though.
No.
It's a tactical, strategic policy that is used to do anything from avert wars to get oil to a place where it isn't right now. So that's the problem that they're leading to. Is what do these lead to? It's not being administered, I don't think, as an economic policy at this point.
Well, that's where I'm going to not make any head movements, smile or frown.
I suggest.
And thank you all for coming. I really enjoyed it.
We will, if we can get the cigar merchants with the bourbon and the Scotch merchants,
Yeah.
we have a future for Roswell. Thank you guys. Thank you for being here. Hang around if you can for a few minutes. Cal, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.